think also records. I think it also records, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
recording. So
Okay.
And transcription.
Yeah, that's extra. I don't want to, but yeah, sure. I'll leave it. All right. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for being here in the office and everybody online who couldn't be here but is here still. I'm going to tell you what I've been doing for the last 3 months. I've been being here meta for my thesis project for my master's. And I was actually looking at site suitability mapping of road water harvesting implementations in different areas. And yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last couple of months under my supervision of Dr. Ilke Cox, my supervisor. So I'm pretty sure you're all quite familiar with like the roads for water concept that you're doing here, but just to give some general background information to regurgitate some of the info that you already have. To start off, like water scarcity for me, when I started here, I really imagined myself like being a farmer, the rain was finally falling to get your crops growing, and then imagined myself like seeing the rainfall on my plot and seeing so much water along the road just being run off and not being used. And imagine how awful it must feel for people in real life that actually have that. So for me, that was really a reason to actually try to help and hopefully make something useful out of my project. And I do really found that, especially in arid and semi-arid region where it is dry, and it's so important that rainwater, every water that is available is actually being used for good. That is an important thing in improving the water resilience of the country. And I learned here through my thesis project that the adoption of road networks is actually a very useful tool in capturing the rainfall in those areas, especially. And it will also lead to a number of other benefits, such as less landscape degradation, less erosion, and less sedimentation, for example. And I've been working here for Meta with the Green Roads for Water program, which was really fun to do. And I got a lot of good feedback from everybody here. So thank you for that in advance. Yeah. So before I started, actually, I did some background research just on a general topic, and I really found that through the literature, that traditional road design often focuses on getting the water as quickly away from the road body as possible, because it interferes with the transport function of the roads, and we really don't want that. So that can also lead to problems. If you get rid of the water as quickly as possible, it can lead to more erosion. The surrounding area will get influenced by that, or it will flood, for example. And that's something that you don't want for the populace that lives around it. And through the Green Roads for Water program, also the Drain to Gain program that's been going into Africa and Kenya, for example, the amount of watering harvest structures has really increased over the last couple of years. So really commend you for that. That's a really good thing that's been happening. But there's still some limitations within those programs. What the literature often found was that the effect was often limited, although there were a lot of implementations. That was usually due to improper design with the landscape surrounding it, or improper use of the water due to people not really knowing how to use the implementations that they received, or it was just in a bad location where they couldn't really use water directly. So I really wanted to improve on that. And I also found that with working with you here, that how the in-field selection of proper water management locations is done now is basically going through the field, driving around and seeing with experts, seeing where the locations would be best. But it can be a very time-consuming thing to do. And it also relies on expert judgment and their imagination in the field and where the implementations could work. Just to make that better, make it more robust in terms of management structure, I really wanted to improve on that. So my aim for the study overall was to improve the implementation of road water harvesting in Makueni County, Kenya, to enhance the effectiveness of water management processes. And for that, I actually had two objectives. I had an objective which was more about the where do you do it, so to assess the optimal location of the road water harvesting implementations. And another objective was to assess the benefits after implementing these road water harvesting implementations in a quantitative way, see if I could find that. And I wanted to bring it all together inside one framework or tool that could be applied in different areas as well, to create like a framework that turn modeling results into workable policies, actually. So I came up with a conceptual model. For my first question, the first goal that I had for the location, I had a analytical hierarchy process structure, which I come back to later. But that basically led to a weighted overlay combination, which I took multiple criteria, overlaid them in map data, and what came out was a suitability map, which gave me the optimal locations for different structures. And using that suitability map, I actually implemented it in a stormwater management model, which is a runoff model. To answer my second question, the second goal was to assess the benefits of these road water harvesting. And I didn't have much validation data, so I ran two different scenarios, one with the modeling, with the implementation applied, and the other without the implementations, to see what the net benefit was, what the difference was between the runoff amounts of the water, of the road body. And that led to the amount of water that's being actually captured by the model. So quickly, my study area is Mboni sub-county. I first did it for Mokwene County in general, but because it's a relative scale that we use for the mapping, it was a bit too big of an area. So we downsized a bit to Mboni sub-county. Now, here's the information about the population size. I won't go over that. But most important, there's a semi-arid climate, and agriculture is the main economic activity. And that's why it's so important to do these implementations here, because it can really benefit the people living there. So to tell you about what the analytical hierarchy process is exactly, what it basically is a mathematical method for making multi-criteria decisions using expert opinions and already known things. So what that does, it derives a weighting for different criteria that we choose based on experts and also different literature, and we define them and make a ranking in order to get an overall goal. So what that is, our goal for this project was getting the optimal road water harvesting site per technique. And we determined that for the level 1 criteria, we could divide it into two different criteria. Runoff potential is, of course, very important. The amount of runoff in an area creates the amount of water that can maybe be captured by something. And the technique stability, for different techniques, we picked 3 different techniques, and it determines where can you apply something. Can you apply it in a steep area or not, etc., etc. And we subdivided that level 1 criteria into level 2 criteria, which are mostly biophysical criteria or socioeconomic criteria. So for the runoff, we have only biophysical criteria, like the amount of rainfall, the amount of slope that there's in an area. And for the techniques, we also added some socioeconomic criteria, like how far away from roads is it, how aware are people that things can be done or not, and do they know how to use it? And to run it off, we did a constraints map with areas that we wanted to omit from all calculations to get like an accurate data map for actual useful locations. And how we do the analytical hierarchy process in terms of the weighting, we compare two, it's called a pairwise comparison. Then you compare two criteria to each other and say, okay, which one is more important with respect to our final goal? So in this case, you could say, okay, we have rainfall and slope, which one determines how much runoff there will be, which one is a little bit more important than the other. And you do that for every criteria that you have, and then eventually you get a ranking. And I'll show you that later, how that ranking looks like. So this is what the criteria maps for the different criteria points that I used look like. It all had to be spatially explicit criteria because I had to map it, of course, just to show something what it looks like in the model. You have average annual rainfall, land cover, slope, so that sort of type. We have a bit more, but it couldn't fit on the page. So just for an idea. So this is the result of the analytical hierarchy process and the weighting process. So I'll run you through the whole table. What you see here is the different level 2 criteria that we picked. And this is for the different technique suitabilities explicitly. This is our goal. And what you can see after the weighting of all the criteria, we got a different ranking. You can see that in this case, average annual rainfall got the highest ranking, followed by land cover and then slope and soil type, etc. This is after the calculations, which is of course always a bit arbitrary, but it gives us like hold on to in terms of what's more important and what's not. And in order to get different locations for different techniques, we subdivided it into the 3 techniques: the farm ponds, the meter drains, and the sand dams, which are pretty common in the area. And of course, you have different feature classes within a criteria. For example, if you take a look at slope, you have the slope, you have a criteria weight, which is a general weight for it. And then you can divide the slope, of course, into steep areas, less steep areas. And it's also important in determining site stability. So for each feature class, that is the slope degree, you could give different weightings per a different technique. So in this case, you want farm ponds on usually flat areas, it's more important. So we gave a higher scoring for the farm ponds to a high or to a lower degree of steepness in the area. That way you can assign values to every suitable location or not, and you can combine them all together inside the model using the weighted overlay combination, and then you get a final map with the sort of ranking results.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
The slope, that's the slope of the area besides the road, not the road itself, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. Sadly, because my DEM was pretty rough, so it's 30 meters DEM, I couldn't find any closer. Okay. We had to go besides the area. Okay. So a general slope area. So this is what the results look like after doing all that and combining it. It's called a suitability map, so as you can see. And I divided it into 5 different categories, going from very poor to very good, which is an arbitrary score. Very good can mean anything, but it's the highest score that was calculated in that area. And if it's a pretty large scale area, we can zoom in pretty far to about a 10 by 10 meters resolution, because that was our smallest data set. What you can see here is the white lines are, for example, the roads. And along those roads, you have a very good location for, in this case, meter drains, what you can see. And these meter drains are, it says basically on this location, you can implement a meter drain and it will be very suitable. And the red is less suitable for a meter drain location. So you can see we specifically asked the model to check out areas along a road. And the farther away from the road it is, it's usually also worse in general. And we found that actually meter drains were the most suitable in the entire study area of all 3 techniques. It's also because meter drains are pretty easy to install. You can install them anywhere along the road, basically, and they have less constraints in that sense. But eventually, you should all look at the different techniques separately and not combine them and compare them in terms of how much suitable area is there compared to others, because it's still useful to know where you can build a farm pond instead of meter drain. So this is my final map. And of course, I wanted to validate it in some way to see if the results are actually correct. So what I did, there was also already an existing road area, which already had meter drains implemented, which I knew of. So using satellite data, I tried to find those locations where I could see it along the map, and then compare it to what my map data said here. So it looks something like this. You see the meter drain inlets over here along the road. And you can actually see that my model on the same location gives a good suitability score on that specific location. So pretty good. You can see none here, and there's also none here. So looks okay. So I did it for 11 different locations along the road that I could find.
Randomly selected locations.
Yeah, so I was just looking along the road. Okay, can I see it? Is there something there? That's also for future studies, something to keep in mind. But I actually found 6 identified locations as very good, which was a very good match with the data. 2 as good, which I also consider a fine match. And 2 there was actually 3 that were identified as moderate suitability, which didn't really correspond to what I saw in satellite data, because there were actually meter drains implemented, which you usually shouldn't do. And I found that it was usually due to the sensitivity with the resolution of my data and also the accuracy of the data maps that I used, which is really important. I'll come back to that.
Could it be that the drains themselves shouldn't have been there?
Yeah,
It could also be something, yeah. But I just imagined that.
I'm a bit biased in favor of your model, but
Yeah,
it could be.
that could also be the case. Yeah, I'm not sure
You know.
if those farmers on the specific location actually know or see that water is being captured by the drain.
Did you check that? Because that's quite interesting. Because sometimes you think, oh, drains must be put in. Maybe they shouldn't have been. Oh, might not have been as necessary there as you know.
Yeah, no, sadly, I didn't get to that validation stage yet because I also couldn't be in the field as much as I wanted to with the short time span of my thing. So this was as far as I could get. This is definitely interesting to look at it further. So my main limitation in that sense, which is that like the land cover data that I use, which is a really important criteria, is prone to error, especially when you look at agricultural area and barren land. They actually look a bit alike if it's not green. And then the interpretation by the land cover data is not very good. I also used global data sets generally, which is also less fine resolution or less accurate in general. But just to see how easy it was to interpret certain things using publicly available data instead of having to fieldwork research first. Which is very important. So, like I said, the framework needs to be further validated in order with actually known harvesting locations to see if the locations actually match and if there are actually good locations for the meter drains. And of course, I told you about the AHP. It will always have a subjective character because it's based on expert opinion, and you did basically determine what criteria is more important than the other. And it is mathematically backed at some degree, but it's still a subjective character that you introduce there. So the more input you have also from locals or from other data sources, the better. And it's actually something you can very easily use in the analytical hierarchical process using surveys, for example. So I found some locations with VOC. So going to the second part, the second goal was actually implementing those locations in a stormwater management model or like a dynamic runoff model over a road. So I just picked meter drains in this case to model, basically because for farm ponds, they need water that is directed by meter drains to fill them up. So you still get the same amount of water that goes through the meter drain as in the farm pond. And also because the sand dams are pretty hard to model in this sense, because it's a very basic runoff model. Also mostly built for urban areas, which made it a bit tricky to get it right. So I picked along a Calvingo road stretch, which is actually a 3 kilometers long road, but I picked just a 1 kilometer road stretch with an elevation you see over here. It goes down towards the lowest point, which is I've called the stream inlet. And then based on my results from the first mapping, I found that 5 different locations were actually suitable for meter drains with a 100-meter interval, which is a basic measure to do the interval with for meter drains based on the guidelines. And this road is actually under pilot by the Drain to Gain by the Drain to Gain project. So I'm really curious to see if they go into the field, actually see those same locations as useful based on expert opinion.
Is it also why you selected the location?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a link to the project.
Yeah, it was interesting to them to see. So model needs some input, of course. So in order to determine what kind of rainfall I would use, what kind of rainfall data I would use, I picked a design rainfall, which is based on the guidelines for modeling. And I had a 42 years daily rainfall data set going from 1981 to 2023. And I calculated the 70% probability of occurrence of a rainfall event in those years, which came out, as you can see the plot over here, to about a 70 millimeter rainfall in 1 day event, which is quite a lot of rainfall for such an area, but it can be a big rainfall event. And that led to a time series where it's like a rainfall plot, because I assumed it would fall in about 6 hours, because a 24-hour rainfall is pretty long, that's one stretch. And came to a rainfall plot about this, and this was implemented in the model to see how much runoff would be generated in the area and how much we could capture.
May I know why you should choose the time scale, like 1981 to 2023?
Basically, the only measure was make it as long as possible. The minimum was 30 years time span in order to get some accurate average data in that sense. And I had some more data. And the data set that I had was a CHIRPS data set, which is both based on observations and some hydrological modeling, which had a pretty large data set in that sense. So I used all the data, but the average from that to get rainfall. You can use any years you like, but the longer the better.
And the 70 is then the maximum rainfall in one certain year.
Yeah.
In 1 day.
Yeah, in 1 day that they measured in the check. Yeah. Some other model input was, of course, the road cross section. What does the road actually look like? Sadly, I couldn't go to the field and do some extra measurements, so I took it from official design guidelines for rural roads that I could find, and it got to a road of about 6.4 meters in width, with a small incline 4% for the road curve, so to say. And the inlet design was mostly the most important, which was also based on the Green Roads for Water guidelines and best practices. I took an inlet design of about 40 centimeters across and 50 centimeters high in order to have the same inlet size as is usually recommended by the guidelines. And the catchment delineation, in this case, it was a bit easier for me to model because the road itself was on the top of a crest of 2 hills. So it didn't really receive any water from overlaying like areas from runoff, but it just receives water that falls on top of the road body itself, and then it runs off. So it made it, and then also the slope of the area made it just to the road incline that was the slope itself. Yes, just to see what was the results though. I had some more results, but as a final most important result, at the end of the road, I found that with implementing the meter drains, it actually led to a road runoff reduction of about 66%, which is the 5 meter drains that you see. So they captured about 103 square meters per second flow in total over the entire rainfall timescale, which is a pretty large reduction. It also means that this was just based on runoff model. If you were to implement more drains, you would probably capture more as well and have less runoff left at the end of the road that you're losing. This is also why I wanted to do more of a comparative studies between a runoff event with implementations and one without, because it was very hard for me, based on all the assumptions they had to make in this model, to make some actually hard decisions in how much actual water was being captured. So the comparative study in this case was more due to the limited availability of data, and I couldn't validate or calibrate this data either, to still have some say in the amount of reduction would actually occur. So the limitations, I already mentioned some of them. It is usually designed for urban stormwater systems, so that means there isn't much natural drainage features inside the model that you can model there. So I had to make some concessions in that sense. And also calibration and validation data for the runoff model was not available yet. That's also something I sadly couldn't do because I didn't have enough time, but I was really curious to see how accurate the model results were in real life if you model them. And two big parts that are not included in the model because it cannot calculate that is that soil erosion and sediment transport. It's not included inside the model, so you cannot say anything about that. You need more hydrological models for that also incorporate the erosion part in that sense. So to recap quickly into the conclusion, my overall goal of the study was to present a flexible and practical framework to identify potential areas for road water harvesting implementations. And in general, the meter drains showed the most suitability for the most locations, but results did show there was a high dependence on the knowledge of the amount of criteria that you had, how important are they not, and of course the resolution of the data that you had. And that means that I would suggest using this tool as a preliminary screening tool to look at where possible locations would be, and then go into the field just on those locations to see if it actually matches with the model data. And the modeling in SWIM was in that sense a bit less concise in results. It still needs to be further subjected to validation and calibration to actually say something about quantitative data about harvestable water. And in general, this framework should provide a tool that gives a theoretical backing to why it is effective in that location for that implementation, which absolutely could convince stakeholders to actually implement it in that location, based not just on expert opinions, but also on measurable data. So as far as I'm concerned, I've already delivered it to some of the people here. My deliverables to you were an entire Excel table that I used as a template for all the weightings that I used. It's very easily changed. The only thing you basically have to change is some of the numbers here, and then you throw it into the code, and it will automatically calculate a new suitability map for you. So the code as well, I've made a notebook and share that with everyone who wants it. So that's very easy. And it is also explained step by step what's happening. So it should be readable for everyone, even if you're not that familiar with Python or anything else. So with that, I thank you. And
Yeah, I have a question. Well, there are two actually. The meter drain, I'm not very good in this terminology. Is this one of these drains that's perpendicular to a road and sort of follows contour lines?
it is
Like this.
it's like a cutoff drain. Does you see the one over here?
Yeah.
So next to the road, the road runoffs being captured by this little channel, and then
But then I was wondering that because you mentioned in that the model, this SWMM model that you ran, it only worked with water falling on the road.
I modeled it for only water falling on the road. It also works if water from the sides is running into the road, and basically the road becomes a channel. But in my case, because of the geomorphology of the area, only the water that falls on the road is being captured. The rest drains to a natural drainage channel and not on the road specifically.
Yeah, okay, that was that was indeed my second question. That so it does allow to, let's say, if you have, because yellow roads have cut off drains from, let's say, the side, then it allows to calculate for or water coming from there and so. Okay.
Would also allow that, but
Yeah.
in my case, it made my modeling a little bit easier to assume that, and it also it's in the geometry.
Yeah, exactly.
So
No, it was on the road.
there was no reason. Yeah. And it felt like looking at the satellite data in general, lots of roads are actually on the crests of hills because it's just easier to build a road there, I think. So for a large part of the roads which I looked at, it's actually still very easily to move.
And how easy can your model be used in other locations? Like, is there data which you use which is very specific to the location, or is the types of data available almost worldwide?
Almost worldwide, actually. All the data that I use, especially for the criteria modeling, was public data sets, which are almost all of them on the global scale. Others just for Africa as a whole, for example. So they're pretty large scale data sets. And I will still manage to have some conclusions about that. So it should be very easily adaptable to any area.
And in maybe not in the model, but in your description, did you also include the extent to which a measure has to be maintained, or whether it? I think you mentioned you actually excluded erosion.
Yeah.
But have you given that some thought?
Sadly, no, because it was hard to spatially see like in what amount of maintenance has to be done in terms of, because I didn't know how much erosion would occur there, so I couldn't give anything about that. It could be used for some, the amount of water that goes through something. So based on, you could take some guesstimations on how quickly something would erode based on how much water goes through it. I also found that some of my results said that when you lower the velocity of the water that goes through a channel, it actually increases the uptake of something like a meteor drain, for example, along the road. So maintenance within that sense could also be like increasing the plants along like, the nature-based solutions inside the channel, which of course would mean more maintenance. So it also depends on the materials that are being used or not being used within a specific meteor drain. But that's always something that has to be determined location specifically for the specific implementations still. And that's either based on assumptions, the model itself doesn't say that much. So sadly, not yet.
Correct.
I want to ask something about the modeling, and yeah, I know that it's quite hard to do the validation, but did you check if any of the criteria give some abnormal results by adding some data sets and then play around?
Yeah. The thing was, for the validation of the criteria itself, because it's the scale that we use is something that we determine as experts. So it's essentially an arbitrary scale in terms of based on knowledge that you have, how important do you think it will be? I do know that some sensitivity analysis about these criteria, how much they influence your weighting, has been done already. And basically their conclusion was that the higher the weight that you give to your criteria, the more sensitive it becomes to changes, which is pretty logical, of course. So in that sense, I didn't feel the need to do an extra analysis in terms of how important is a criteria in the final end goal, because you basically determine it yourself at the start based on the expert inputs that you have. So it was a double step in that sense, but it has been done already and it could be implemented quite easily with an extra calculation.
And another question is that because you use the data just up to the 2023, so I was wondering if I put some data that is maybe after 2023, maybe up to 2040, for example. So
Predictions.
Can this model can project the result that can give some insights to maybe the policymakers for the implementation?
That's good. Yeah, in both parts of the model. So the first, the suitability mapping part, if you have predictive land use mapping, for example, how much will the land use change? If you implement that instead of the current land use map that I have, you will get a different prediction of location suitability, for example. And you can use it with any map, which has a predictive quantity. And for the water modeling itself, the swim model, you can also use different projections and how much water will actually fall within an area along a different time projection. So with with increased climate change, for example, rainfall could be increased or decreased. And you could also quite easily change that, which is just one click of a button. Actually, it's very Swim itself was a very pleasant model to work with, pretty easy, but it's mostly made for an urban setting. So the conversion to a rural area had some limitations in that sense. You have to say that.
Nice.
The only way you use the rainfall is the 70 millimeter,
In
which
this
could
case, yes.
become 75 or 60 if you want to project it to the future.
Yeah, it also allows for my dynamic modeling, so you could do it over time range,
Right.
but it of course also increases the uncertainty of things. But it also allows for some projections. Yeah.
So then you could project a certain rainfall pattern in a year.
For example, but there's an you can see for if you implement farm ponds, for example, okay, how much do I need to capture to bridge the dry period in an area? So that would be very interesting to further develop. And actually, yeah, the validation and calibration mostly is key here, because now it's just an arbitrary number. So I'm very curious how accurate the assumptions are in real life in this case.
How will you do that? How will be the follow-up now for this? Is there an immediate user for the model? You mentioned the project.
Yeah, the Training to Gain project. Yeah, it's running now in 20. They don't want to speak for that, but they said they were interested in actually using it. I'm gonna check the.
Oh, there's lots of hands.
Sorry, guys.
Hello,
You
people.
forgot us.
I'm so sorry.
You were so silent.
Oh, shall I go for the? I'll go question by question then.
Yes.
The table itself, what you can see now is the colors represent a different degree of suitability. So a high number, like 9, means it's very important for that certain technique. So I made it a color so it's easier to distinguish different things. So you can see if I move this, a high color, a green color is very important. Red is not suitable at all and not important for disability, so it should be omitted in that sense. And the degree from 1 to 9 is based on previous literature like SATI, which is AHP is based on. And then all these numbers are normalized before input in the model automatically to give a relative scale in that sense. Yeah, so also for the future recommendations, I would say that validation is the most important aspect right now. So I'm really curious, like in the new pilots roads that they have, if they actually go into the field and check their maps with the maps the model gives, if it's actually accurate with what they would choose if they were just expert opinions looking around. And then you can actually say, are the criteria that we chose the right weight? Did we give the right weightings to them? And then you can also use that for future studies. And for the runoff modeling, I'm very curious. You could maybe implement some water measurement stations along drains, for example, how much water was captured. And then you can measure that with model output, which can be expensive undertaking if you do it for a long time, but it also depends on the accuracy like instruments that you have. But I'm not that well read into that sort of fields. So, thinking about it. Yeah.
I guess Francesco is very urgent or very eager to say something.
Thank you, Renier. No, I think it was partially touched with Simon's second question, if I'm not wrong, because for the water amount modeling, for the water runoff modeling, you had chosen a road before doing that, and this is a crest road. So I was wondering if while you were preparing, you also tried on other roads that are, because that would change quite a lot the model in a way. I mean, you have a watershed that is not only the road, so land use land cover would have a stronger influence, right?
Yeah,
more of an yeah. In this case, I didn't do the entire model run for also the other. If you would have a runoff into the road itself and use more of drainage capture, but that's because when you implement that, that's why the swim model might not be as accurate, because it's an urban model system. It's hard to determine runoff amounts in a natural area, while it's more suited for just hard land covers, just urban area, built up area.
When runoff is 100%.
Exactly, and that's more built for it, especially when you introduce more natural vegetation in areas that are not built up. So that's why the roads were still relatively easy. Now, I could also check the runoff coefficient with known runoff coefficients that were in the guidelines to kind of calibrate the model itself a little bit. So I didn't do it for that reason. One, because it was necessary in my area, and two, it introduces a lot of extra uncertainty in that sense. And to say anything specific about that, we have more validation data as well, because it really determines the outcome.
Yeah, but we could use the model, right, in an area where the road is not on the crest, right? It's just yeah.
It's still very easy to see. It's also a very visual model, which I really like. So you just draw and you can put inputs everywhere. So it makes it very nice spatially to do that. So yeah, if you want more tips or run it through it together, we can do it as well. It's really fun to check it out. So.
Yeah, I mean, I would be curious to see the notebook, how it works, but yeah, that's maybe another session.
I'll share it with you. And Theopolis?
Yes, thanks, Joram, for the presentation. I think this model is something that I think, as I would call the missing link, that we've always had, especially when trying to see what techniques can be used in different locations along a road stretch, for example. Say for the missing data, I think with the current project and the area that you try to model, now that we are doing everything practically there, I think ourselves and Mike will actually be able to have more realistic data and also validate and continue to better the model. I think Faith is in a position to edit and do all that coding bits. So ideally, one of the things that we've been encountering is the structures to be done at a place and also the cost aspects. I think we could continue to work on this model to better it and also include the cost aspect. For example, if you say a place is suitable for a pond and this is the type of soil, then you could already quantify, like excavating 1 cubic of soil costs this amount. So if maybe you have 1,000 cubic of soil you can excavate, then this is the actual cost, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think it is a very good step in the right direction. And I really hope we take it up as meta, so that it can really also become a quick scan tool to help in budgeting, and also what really farmers have been looking for in terms of interventions and also the cost aspects. Thanks very, very much for the presentation, and we hope to continue interacting with the tool.
Thank you very much for all the comments, and really good luck. And if there's any questions or more data that you need from me that I have already, just let me know. I'm willing to give everything we have. It's all right.
Thanks.
Good luck with the tool.
What's next for you?
I'm not sure yet. I'm going on holiday
you
first.
Continue on this?
No, I think I'm dropping the research. Like I won't do a PhD, so I think it's not really my thing, especially like the writing part of it. I do really like. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I do really like the modeling part and doing more of the practical side of it, actually implementing it somewhere. So I might do it some further, but as of now, I have no plans in future projects yet. So I'm enjoying my freedom for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something that you surprised yourself that you liked or particularly disliked, or what did you?
I got
gain some
really
insight into where your passion lies. So you get up in the morning.
I got really excited by actually getting the results out of the modeling. We just spent a few weeks only looking at numbers and just hoping it would work.
Yeah.
And then when I finally got the maps and got it running, it was like feeling, and you really felt you had something tangible that you actually could use and talk about. And I'm really like a visual person. I like to point at things and then explain what's really going on. So I feel like the mapping part, the spatial aspect of it was really nice. Yeah, I really like that. So that's why the writing is also not really my thing. It's more like I'm gonna just tell and show.
You have tools for writing now, isn't it?
True. Yeah, I didn't use them in my paper. No.
C model. Thank you.
Yes.
All right.
Amazing job, Yoram. Thanks a lot. Was impressive. So it's
Thank you
best
so
luck with
much.
everything. Yeah.
I hope your child in the cot also learned a lot from the
She
presentation.
really, she really likes it. She says, yeah.
It'll be super slow.
He's so baffled by the response.
You can see.
Oh, that's
Oh, that's a bad note. Okay, yeah. With that, I'm pretty sure we can end